Hi, this is Professor Favors with American Literature. So the topic lecture today is W.E.B. Du Bois's Selections from the Souls of Black Folk. The actual text is actually The Souls of Black Folk, and it is a larger work, but we are only getting selections from the main text. This is also part of turn of the 20th century in terms of the literary work, which also contributes to the growth of modernism. So this is American Literature, W.E.B. Du Bois's Selections from the Souls of Black Folk. This presentation is subject to fair use. Now let's discuss selections from the souls of Black folks. So now that we have the historical context, and this is man's problem with self-perception compared to social perception. I did my master's thesis on the souls of Black folk on Du Bois, particularly using double consciousness as a universal application. So I'm very aware of Du Bois. I got my master's degree back in 2005, so I had to kind of remind myself of some of his writings, but my master's thesis was really about applying double consciousness universally and looking at the differences between self-perception and social perception. So let's look at select passages. So in the first paragraphs, Du Bois is identifying and outlining the problem. So let's read. Herein lie buried many things which if read with patience may show the strange meaning of being black. Here at the dawning of the 20th century, this meaning is not without interest to you, gentle reader, for the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. I pray you then receive my little book in all charity, studying my words with me, forgiving mistake and foible for sake of the faith and passion that is in me, and seeking the grain of truth hidden there. So this is the problem. He's telling you what the problem is. The problem of the color line. The color line is the color line between black and white. I have sought here to sketch in vague, uncertain outline the spiritual world in which 10,000 Americans live and strive. First, in 2 chapters, I have tried to show what emancipation meant to them and what was its aftermath. In the 3rd chapter, I have pointed out to the slow rise of personal leadership and criticized candidly the leader who bears the chief burden of his race today. Then in 2 other chapters, I have sketched in swift outline 2 worlds within and without the veil, and thus have come to the central problem of training men for life. Venturing now into deeper detail, I have in 2 chapters studied the struggles of the mass millions of the black peasantry, and in another have sought to make clear the present relations of the sons of master and man. Leaving then the white world, I have stepped within the veil, raising it that you may view faintly its deeper recesses, the meaning of its religion, the passion of its human sorrow, and the struggle of its greater souls. So now he's identified the problem, which is the problem of the color line, what goes on between 2 sets of people, or 2 groups of people, 2 demographics of people who have to go back and forth against the color line. But then he outlines what he plans to do, how he's going to outline this particular problem based upon the perception of emancipation, or the 2 worlds that within or without the veil, or the struggles of the mass millions, and then what happens when you step within the veil. So this is identifying and outlining the problem. He presents a rhetorical question and is based upon his own experiences, of course. But the rhetorical question is, how does it feel to be a problem? And this is when he realizes that the perception of black men, or the perception of black people, or the perception of former slaves are perceived as a problem. So to the real question, how does it feel to be a problem? I answer seldom a word. In a wee wooden schoolhouse, something put into the boys and girls' heads to buy gorgeous visiting cards, 10 cents a package, in exchange. The exchange was merry till one girl, a tall newcomer, refused my card. refused it peremptorily with a glance. Then it dawned on me with a certain suddenness that I was different from the others, or like mayhap in heart and life and longing, but shut out from their world by a vast veil. I had thereafter no desire to tear down that veil, to to creep through. I held all beyond it in common contempt and lived above it in a region of blue sky and great wandering shadows. So, is if you put if you say, for instance, you make this just a room of all white people, just white kids playing together, exchanging cards, there wouldn't necessarily be a racial discrimination situation in that case, but you can get the same effect of someone snatching a card out of your hand and you feeling different from everyone else. And usually, when it's one race, say for instance the white race, and you have that happen, it's a class situation over a race um, situation. That sky was bluest when I could beat my mates at examination time, or beat them at a foot race, or even beat their stringy heads. Alas, with the years of all this fine contempt began to fade, for the words I longed for and all their dazzling opportunities were theirs, not mine. But they should not keep these prizes. I said some, all I would wrest from them. Just how I would do it, I could never decide. By reading law, by healing the sick, by telling the wonderful tales that swam in my head some way. Why did God make me an outcast and a stranger in my own house? So even though the person is a citizen in America or in the United States, he is considered an outcast in his own house, in his own citizenship. So how does it feel to be a problem? So he answers, he creates a solution for us to understand what that means, and um, frames it using the concept of double consciousness. He did not necessarily originate the term. This term was used much earlier by Henry James, but not in the form of double consciousness. It was another type of term. But he's the one, I believe, who applied it in a racial context. So after the Egyptian and Indian, the Greek and Roman, the Teuton and Mongolian, the Negro is sort of a seventh son, born with a veil, gifted with second sight in this American world, a world which yields him no true self-consciousness, but only lets him see himself through the revelation of the other world. So no self-perception, social perception is all that matters. It is a peculiar sensation, this double consciousness, this sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, of measuring one's soul by the tape of a world that looks on in amused contempt and pity. One ever feels his two-ness, an American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals, and one dark body whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. And so now he is defining uh, the term double consciousness. And then he's now providing the history that supports that concept. The history of the American Negro is the history of this strife, this longing to attain self-conscious manhood, to merge his double self into a better and truer self. In this merging, he wishes neither of the older selves to be lost. He would not Africanize America, for America has too much to teach the world in Africa. He would not bleach his Negro soul in a flood of white Americanism, for he knows that Negro blood has a message for the world. He simply wishes to make it possible for a man to be both a Negro and American, without being cursed and spit upon by his fellows, without having the doors of opportunity closed roughly in his face. So with America, America is bases its ideology on the melting pot theory. Once you come over here, you melt yourself into, or you assimilate yourself into the ideals of being American. You can't have any sort of separate identity from that. And what he's saying, that this is the struggle that the Negro has in America, the former slave, the Negro, the Black American, the African American, the foundational Black American. There are so many different changes because it's going back and forth against the color line that sort of causes you to have to change your identities. And so that's what he's talking about in terms of the feeling of double consciousness. Wrestling with double aim. So anytime that you are in the mindset of double consciousness, having to sort of uh, vacillate between the color line, you do so with double aims. Here in America, in the few days since emancipation, the black man's turning hither and thither in hesitant and doubtful striving has often made his very strength to lose effectiveness, to seem like absence of power, like weakness. And yet it is not weakness, it is the contradiction of double aims. The double aim struggle of the black artisan, on the one hand, to escape white contempt for a nation of mere hearers of wood and drawers of water, and on the other hand, to plow and nail and dig for a poverty-stricken horde, could only result in making a poor craftsman, for he had but half a heart in either cause. So it's kind of like the more you spend on one thing, trying to pursue it, one aim, you lose your effectiveness to sustain another aim. By the poverty and ignorance of his people, the Negro minister or doctor was tempted toward quackery and demagogy, and by the criticism of the other world towards ideals that made him ashamed of his lowly tasks. This waste of double aims, this seeking to satisfy two reconciled ideals, has wrought sad havoc with the courage of faith and deeds of 10,000 people, has sent them often wooing false gods and invoking false means of salvation, and at times has even seemed about to make them ashamed of themselves. So all of this ain't all is you usually, if you think about a dartboard in a billiards place where people play pool, you try to throw at the dartboard to get to the center, right? To get to the bullseye. And every time it looks like you're about to do it, is there are contradictory aims. There are people on the other side, on both sides of you, saying, "Oh, you can't hit that bullseye. You can't do it. You can't. You're not going to be do. You're not going to be able to do it." And so then, through multiple attempts, you don't hit the bullseye. So then you begin to lose your effectiveness. You begin to lose your strength. You begin to lose your focus on trying to hit the target. And so as long as you keep listening to the people on the other side of you and their aims, and try to support and people please their aims, you're never going to hit the dartboard, right? You're never going to hit the bullseye. So anticipation of emancipation as a solution. So now he's getting into a discussion of the perception of emancipation. Way back in the days of bondage, they thought to see in one divine event the end of all doubt and disappointment. Few men ever worshiped freedom with half such unquestioning faith as did the American Negro for 2 centuries. To him, so far as he thought and dreamed, slavery was indeed the sum of all villainies, the cause of all sorrow, the root of all prejudice. Emancipation was the key to a promised land of sweeter beauty and ever stretched before the eyes of wearied Israelites. And song and exhortation swelled one refrain: liberty. In his tears and curses, the God he implored had freedom in his right hand. At last it came suddenly, fearfully, like a dream. With one carnival of blood and passion came the message in his own plaintive cadences. Shout, O children, shout, you're free, for God has brought you liberty. So it's the people waiting for the Emancipation Proclamation that you see in Booker T. Washington's work, where they're all waiting for the man to come with a letter that basically suggests that all of you slaves are now former slaves are free. So he's calling this idea of emancipation as one divine event, as if that's going to solve all the problems of the American Negro. So then once you have emancipation, you have the problem of freedom. Years have passed away since then, 10, 20, 40 years of national life, 40 years of renewal and development, and yet the swarthy specter sits in an accustomed seat at the nation's feast. In vain do we cry to this our vastest social problem. Take any shape but that, and my firm nerves shall never tremble. The nation has not yet found peace from its sins. The freedman has not yet found in freedom his promised land. Whatever of good may have come in these years of change, the shadow of a deep disappointment upon the Negro people, a disappointment all the more bitter because the unattained ideal was unbounded save by the simple ignorance of a lowly people. The first decade was merely a prolongation of the vain search for freedom, the boom that seemed ever barely to elude their grasp, like a tantalizing will o' the wisp, maddening and misleading the headless host. The Holocaust of war, the terrors of the Ku Klux Klan, and the lies of carpetbaggers, the disorganization of industry, and the contradictory advice of friends and foes left the bewildered serf with no new watchword beyond the old cry of freedom. So it's almost like a cycle. It's almost like this problem of search of freedom has now become a cycle where that's all you search for. It's kind of like the people who go out and protest. They keep protesting for the exact same situation, but every generation, every season of life, that same situation keeps coming back around. So then you end up being in the equivalent of a hamster's wheel. So there was no new watchword beyond the old cry of freedom, meaning that we're still living in the past using the same types of tactics and strategies and keywords that may not necessarily work in the present. So then liberty as the solution to the problem of freedom. So we're moving out of emancipation to freedom to liberty, um, and we're still in the same boat. So as the time flew, however, he began to grasp a new idea, the ideal of liberty, demanded for its attainment powerful means, and these the 15th Amendment gave him. The ballot, which before he had looked upon as a visible sign of freedom, he now regarded as a chief means of gaining and perfecting the liberty with which war had partially endowed him. And why not? Had not votes made war and emancipated millions? Had not votes enfranchised the freedmen? Was anything impossible to a power that had done all this? A million black men started with renewed zeal to vote themselves into the kingdom. So it's moving again, it's moving out of emancipation, out of freedom, out of liberty to now vote or enfranchisement. Okay. Slowly but steadily in the following years, a new vision began gradually to replace the dream of political power. A powerful movement, the rise of another ideal to guide the unguided, another pillar of fire by night after a clouded day. It was the ideal of book learning, the curiosity born of compulsory ignorance to know and test the power of the Kabbalistic letters of the white men, the longing to know. Here at least seemed to have been discovered the mountain path to Canaan, longer than the highway of emancipation and law, steep and rugged, but straight, leading to heights high enough to overlook life. So we are now moving into voting as a form of liberty, and to sustain liberty, we now need to get into to book learning, and that's going to resolve the problem of freedom or staying in the cycle of pursuing freedom. We have two strategies that we are considering. So now we're going to resolve our double consciousness as well through book learning. We want to move out of double consciousness into self-consciousness. So book learning changed the child of emancipation to the youth with dawning self-consciousness, self-realization, self-respect. He began to have a dim feeling that to attain his place in the world, he must be himself and not another. For the first time, he sought to analyze the burden he bore upon his back, that dead weight of social degradation partially masked behind a half-named Negro problem. He felt his poverty without a cent, without a home, without land, tools, or savings. He had entered into competition with rich, landed, skilled neighbors. So think about it. In Booker T. Washington's work Up from Slavery, they get the letter that they're now free. But what do you now do with your freedom? You're free, but you are emancipated as and now have become former slaves. But all you know is the plantation. All you know is the master slave relationship. You don't know how to sort of help pull yourself out of so social degradation, pull yourself out of poverty. With a home, with land, with tools, with savings, with competition. So the more that you engage in book learning is going to help you to understand your self-consciousness and resolve the double consciousness. To be a poor man is hard, but to be a poor race in a land of dollars is the very bottom of hardships. He felt the weight of his ignorance, not simply of letters, but of life, of business, of the humanities. The accumulated sloth and shirking and awkwardness of decades and centuries shackled his hands and feet. Nor were his burden all poverty and ignorance. The red stain of bastardy, which 2 centuries of systematic legal defilement of Negro women had stamped upon his face, meant not only the loss of ancient African chastity, but also the hereditary weight of a mass corruption from white adulterers, threatening almost the obliteration of the Negro home. A people thus handicapped ought not to be asked to race with the world, but rather allowed to give all its time and thoughts to its own social problems. That's going to create the room for self-consciousness, which we could, in our modern time, think about it in terms of self-reflection, contemplation, um, uh, taking the time to heal and rest. The social problem with book learning. So now that we are understanding that that's what we need to pursue instead of just a cry of freedom repeatedly, but liberty through book learning and voting, we got perspectives. We got the social problem. Remember that the Separate Car Act did not say that blacks were illegally inferior, but said that but read that they were socially inferior. So now that we have blacks or Negroes, former slaves, wanting to pursue voting, wanting to pursue liberty, wanting to pursue other forms of freedom, we get people, white people across the color line saying you shouldn't do this. But the facing of so vast a prejudice could not but bring the inevitable self-questioning, self-disparagement, and lowering of ideals which ever accompany repression and breed in an atmosphere of contempt and hate. Whisperings and portents came home upon the four winds. Lo, we are diseased and dying, cried the dark host. We cannot write, or our voting is in vain. What need of education, since we must always cook and serve? And the nation echoed and enforced this self-criticism, saying, so this is the Negro who is coming out of freedom. I mean, coming out of slavery through emancipation, pursuing freedom through liberty, book learning, and voting, is still dealing with its own frailty, its vulnerability. This is what the move from double consciousness into self consciousness comes. Um, it reveals. The more you begin to think about your condition, the more you realize just how vulnerable you really are. But that's your that's your self criticism. That's your self perception. The social perception is now going to validate what you sort of believe about yourself while you are going through a transition. This doesn't mean that you hate yourself. This doesn't mean that you don't believe you can do it. It's just that it's going to be a task. So the social perception is now saying, well, be content to be servants and nothing more. What need of higher culture for half men? Away with the black man's ballot, by force or fraud, and behold the suicide of a race. Nevertheless, out of the evil came something of good, the more careful adjustment of education to real life, the clearer perception of the Negro's social responsibilities, and the sobering realization of the meaning of progress. So even though this is our argument, this works like a counter argument. This right here works like a rebuttal. No matter what we're feeling and no matter what other people are saying, we're still pursuing progress. We understand that this emancipation to freedom, to liberty, to book learning, to voting is a sobering realization of our current status, but that does not mean that we're not going to move towards progress. You may think we're going to try to sort of kill ourselves or unalive ourselves, right? But we're still going to move towards progress. The need for progress, not disunity. So the training of the schools we need today more than ever. The training of deft hands, quick eyes and ears, and above all, the broader, deeper, higher culture of gifted minds and pure hearts. The power of the ballot we need ensures self-defense. What shall save us from a second slavery? Freedom too, the long sought, we will seek. The freedom of life and limb, the freedom to work and think, the freedom to love and aspire. So we have now defined, instead of living by the word freedom and running in circles, we are now defining the types of freedoms that we're going to enjoy, which includes life and limb. That means we have rights to our own body. The freedom to work and think, we have rights to pursue economic advancement. And the freedom to love and aspire, we have rights to pursue um, love, work, culture, liberty. All these we need, not singly, but together, not successively, but together, each growing and aiding each, and all striving toward that vaster idea that swims before the Negro people. The idea of human brotherhood, gained through the unifying ideal of race. The idea of fostering and developing the traits and talents of the Negro, not in opposition to or contempt for other races, but rather in large conformity to the greater ideals of the American Republic, in order that someday on American soil, two world races may give each to each those characteristics both so sadly lack. In other words, um, Du Bois is telling the world, the white man, the black man, that this should be us trying to unify under the idea of race and not be pitted against each other under different races. That we are part of the American Republic. This should be the ideal of human brotherhood, not pitting one race against the other. So this is about progress, not disunity. So here's where now Du Bois criticizes. He lays out his case, helping you to understand the role of double consciousness, identifying, outlining the problem, what we should be doing, and now he's going to criticize Booker T. Washington, and he's largely criticizing Washington's conciliatory stance. So, criticism number one: basis of Washington's program. Easily the most striking thing in the history of the American Negro since 1876 is the ascendancy of Mr. Booker T. Washington. It began at the time when war memories and ideals were rapidly passing. A day of astonishing commercial development was dawning. A sense of doubt and hesitation overtook the freedmen's sons. Then it was that then it was that his leading began. Mr. Washington came with a simple, definite program at the psychological moment when the nation was a little ashamed of having bestowed so much sentiment on Negroes and was concentrating its energies on dollars. So anytime you come, he tapped in. What he's basically suggesting is that Washington tapped into the psychology of both whites and Negroes. His program of industrial education, conciliation of the South, and submission and silence as to civil and political rights was not wholly originated. The free Negroes from 1830 up to wartime had striven to build industrial schools, and the American Missionary Association had from the first taught various trades. And Price and others had sought a way of honorable alliance with the best of the Southerners, but Mr. Washington first indissolubly linked these things. He put enthusiasm, unlimited energy, and perfect faith into his program, and changed it from a bypath into a veritable way of life. And the tale of the methods by which he did this is a fascinating study of human life. So it's almost like he's saying that Booker T. Washington's strategies were not necessarily original. They did not originate with him. There were already people in different areas of the country who were doing similar things. He sort of praises Washington on the strategy of linking these things together. So the Free Negroes, the American Missionary Association, building industrial schools, that he brought all of those two to three or more things together to make it a way of life. So that's what he's praising him on. He's praising him on this idea that he did have a pretty good strategy of bringing them together, but that doesn't necessarily mean that these strategies originated with him. But that's the basis of his Washington's program, that that Du Bois has a problem with the industrial education aspect of it, because it's Du Bois who encourages higher education, conciliation of the South. Don't be so almost apologetic, or basically suggests that blacks are not bitter towards whites because of slavery, whereas it's Du Bois who hates the Plessy v. Ferguson case, and then submission and silence as to the civil and political rights is Du Bois who says we need to push for voting rights as a form of liberty. It is Washington who suggests we don't need to be concerned about that right now. We need to get ourselves together, or pull ourselves up by our bootstraps economically and financially. We need to focus on this educating our men, so that we can be economically stable. All right, criticism number 2, Washington's plan to gain Southern sympathy. This is something that he has a problem with, something that Du Bois has a problem with. So to gain the sympathy and cooperation of the various elements comprising the white South was Mr. Washington's first task. And this, at the time of Tuskegee was founded, seemed for a black man well nigh impossible. And yet, 10 years later, it was done in the words spoken at Atlanta. In all things purely social, we can be as separate as the five fingers, and yet as one in all things essential to mutual progress. So Washington wants to gain the Southerners' sympathy so that we can progress moving together versus moving apart from each other, as indicated in your five fingers. As a metaphor. This Atlanta Compromise is by all odds the most notable thing in Mr. Washington's career. The South interpreted it in different ways. The radicals received it as a complete surrender of the demand for civil and political equality. The conservatives as a generously conceived working basis for mutual understanding. So both approved it, and today its author is certainly the most distinguished Southerner since Jefferson Davis, and the one with the largest personal following. So because it's Du Bois who suggests that because Washington wanted to sort of gain the sympathy of Southerners, which really translates in today's term people please, and it's Du Bois who says that because of his actions and because of his need to gain Southern sympathy, by default, he is surrendering the demand for civil and political equality. So What Du Bois is criticizing about Washington is that Washington is uh, is telling blacks through the Atlanta Compromise, don't worry about, we're not bitter towards you whites for slavery, and we're not really concerned too much about the civil and political equality just yet. We're not going to pursue that. We're going to pursue economic advancement. Okay, and so then now that um, he's suggesting to white Southerners, Washington is suggesting to white Southerners that you don't have anything to worry about in terms of us trying to pursue any voting rights. He has a he has gained a mutual understanding. He has gained a personal following. Many people like him more now because he surrendered that ideal. And so this is criticism from Du Bois about Washington's strategy to not be more concerned about civil and political equality. Criticism number three, so Washington's strategy to gain Northern place in society. So next to this achievement comes Mr. Washington's work in gaining place and consideration in the North. Others, less shrewd and tactful, had formerly essayed to sit on these two stools and had fallen between them. But as Mr. Washington knew the heart of the South from birth and training, so by singular insight he intuitively grasped the spirit of the age which was dominating the North. And so thoroughly did he learn the speech and thought of triumphant commercialism and the ideals of material prosperity that the picture of a lone black boy poring over French grammar amid the weeds and dirt of a neglected home soon seemed to him the acme of absurdities. One wonders what Socrates and St. Francis of Assisi would say to this. So what Du Bois is suggesting through Washington's conciliatory approach, that he's focused more on the commercialism aspect of life as a way of life, and not on the reading and book learning. He's not concerned more on the intellectual aspect of Black life, or what should be considered the intellectual aspect of life. He doesn't care anything about French grammar, according um, to Du Bois. He doesn't care anything about learning, Socrates. This is something that Du Bois likes because he pushes for higher education, whereas Washington pushes for industrial education. And yet, this very singleness of vision and thorough oneness with his age is a mark of the successful man. That more people like him more people like Washington more than they like Du Bois. It is as it is it is as though nature must needs make men narrow in order to give them force. So Mr. Washington's cult has gained unquestioning followers. His work has wonderfully prospered. His friends are legion, and his enemies are confounded. So through when Washington's strategy to sort of work together with progress, but not pursue civil and political equality, and focus more on commercialism, then he has more people loving him, and he's considered more of a successful man than would be Du Bois. And Du Bois is showing somewhat his own kind of insecurity here, um, because he's looking out and looking at the success of another man and not necessarily looking at himself and his own success. In other words, he's looking at the people who follow Washington and not the people who follow him. Criticism number four, social perception of Washington's conciliation. So, among his own people, however, Mr. Washington has encountered the strongest and most lasting opposition, amounting at times to bitterness, and even today continuing strong and insistent, even though largely silenced in outward expression by the public opinion of the nation. Some of this opposition is, of course, merely envy, the disappointment of demagogues, and the spite of narrow minds. But aside from this, there is among educated and thoughtful colored men in all parts of the land a feeling of deep regret, sorrow, and apprehension at the wide currency and ascendancy which some of Mr. Washington's theories have gained. So the person who is the loudest and the most powerful oftentimes gets the most press or the most attention. And so what you see here is not only to me, not only Du Bois's um, his bitterness towards a man who is getting more recognition. You see the other black men, other colored men, their bitterness towards Washington um, conciliatory approach, and it's getting attention. So they're focused more on the attention, the ego aspect of what's going on, the pursuit of freedom, the pursuit of liberty, book learning, voting rights, etc. They're focused more on one person getting all the attention. But that's just the strategy of Washington. Whether you like it or not, it's a strategy. The problem, though, I will say, is that with one person's theories being more received than anyone else, creates an imbalance in the social perception of black people or Negro people or former slaves. It looks like this person here, and Washington is considered the Moses of his generation. It looks like this one person has all the answers. This one black person has all the answers. When there are other black people with intellectual um, insight who also have answers. These same men admire his sincerity of purpose and are willing to forgive much to honest endeavor, which is doing something worth worth the doing. They cooperate with Mr. Washington as far as they conscientiously can. Indeed, it is no ordinary tribute to this man's tact and power that steering as he must between so many diverse interests and opinions, he so largely retains the respect of all. So there is some form of respect for Washington, and maybe some of the Negro men at the time or the black men at the time struggling with the fact that there was respect for him, that they feel like they were not respected enough as well. Criticism number 5: Washington's leadership strategies. So, but Booker T. Washington arose as essentially the leader not of one race, but of two, a compromiser between the South, the North, and the Negro. Naturally, the Negroes resented at first bitterly signs of compromise, which surrendered their civil and political rights, even though this was to be exchanged for larger chances of economic development. The rich and dominating North, however, was not only weary of the race problem, but was investing largely in Southern enterprises and welcomed any method of peaceful cooperation. Thus, by national opinion, the Negroes began to recognize Mr. Washington's leadership, and the voice of criticism was hushed. So, what Washington was trying to get formerly former slaves to understand that yes, civil and political rights are important. Civil and political equality is important, but we need to focus more on the economic development of the Negro. To focus on civil and political rights when they are all when we are at a place in the country where we just got out of a civil war. The southern states are mad that they have to give up their slaves. We have the Emancipation Proclamation. You have too much anger going on at the time. The more we focus on our own economic development, meaning that we now have to take possession of ourselves. We now have to possess ourselves in freedom. We no longer have a master. So therefore, we need to focus on how to try to bring ourselves up economically. We don't need to focus on this. So the more, even though black people at that time were mad at him for compromising, um, eventually they got the understanding of what he was trying to go after, his leadership, what he's trying to do, and so the voices of criticism were hushed. Mr. Washington Mr. Washington represents in Negro thought the old attitude of adjustment and submission. So we still have a criticism, but adjustment at such a peculiar time as to make his program unique. This is an age of unusual economic development, and Mr. Washington's program naturally takes an economic cast, becoming a gospel of work and money to such an extent as apparently almost completely to overshadow the higher aims of life. So the higher aims of life for Du Bois is higher education, is fighting for civil and political equality, and having a higher sort of economic life, right? The problem with that is that just because Du Bois grew up in an affluent neighborhood, that doesn't mean that every other black person grew up in an affluent neighborhood. So there are higher aims of life, but you have to push for work and money. And work at that time uh, was misinterpreted by the Negroes who resented, because slavery was work, but unpaid work. And so when Washington pushed for the idea of work and money, adjust and submit, making his program unique, it was to work and create your own economic development. It wasn't to work and be a slave again, even if you might perceive working, say today, 9 to 5 as slave wages. That's not slavery, though. Slavery was unpaid labor. And so moreover, this is an age when the more advanced races are coming in closer contact with the less developed races, and the race feeling is therefore intensified. And Mr. Washington's program practically accepts the alleged inferiority of the Negro race. That might be true on in his biased opinion, but all races coming, all the Negro people coming out of slavery would be considered inferior because they have to build, they have to work, they have to work for money this time. So they may have to give up certain kind of rights for right now so that they could quell the fears of white Southerners who think uh, Negroes are going to take over their rights. So Washington's leadership strategies. Criticism number 5. Criticism number 6, Washington's doctrine and consequences. So, in answer to this, it has been claimed that the Negro can survive only through submission. Mr. Washington distinctly asks that black people give up, at least for the present, 3 things: political power, insistence on civil rights, and then higher education of the Negro youth, concentrate all their energies. So he's saying that Washington wants the Negro youth to concentrate all their energies on industrial education and accumulation of wealth and the conciliation of the South. This policy has been courageously and insistently advocated for over 15 years and has been triumphant for perhaps 10 years. As a result of this tender of the palm branch, what has been the return? In these years there have occurred the disfranchisement of the Negro, the legal creation of a distinct status of civil inferiority for the Negro, the steady withdrawal of aid from institutions for the higher training of the Negro. These movements are not, to be sure, direct results of Mr. Washington's teachings, but his propaganda has, without a shadow of doubt, helped their speedier accomplishment. I think the interesting thing about Du Bois is that he's looking at Washington's doctrine and leadership through the lens of a rich person. He comes from an affluent background. Washington grew up as a slave on a plantation. So um, when he's trying to lead people through industrial education, that doesn't mean that he doesn't believe in the higher education of people. He ends up uh, uh, forming an institution, a higher education institution. But when you are coming out of a particular status, slave status, and becoming a former slave, you have to focus on what will get you to where you need to get to first: industrial education, accumulation of wealth, conciliation of the South. Doesn't mean I necessarily agree with it, but um, through submission. But what's the most important thing? However, from Du Bois's point, his strategy resulted in the disfranchisement of the Negro, or the legal creation of a civil inferiority. Du Bois has an issue with inferiority, superiority, and inferiority. And then the steady withdrawal of aid from institutions for higher training of the Negro. He has this thing. It's interesting how when you come from affluence, you come from how you see the world is based upon how you think it actually should be, or it is, or it can be. Not everyone can be affluent. Not everyone can come from a certain type of background where they are immediately perceived as superior. And so I think Du Bois is having a superiority to inferiority conversation with Washington through his writing. Criticism number 7, Washington's paradox. So is it possible and probable that 9 millions of men can make effective progress in economic lines if they are deprived of political rights, made a servile caste, and allowed only the most meager chance for developing their exceptional men? If history and reason give any distinct answer to these questions, it is emphatic. It is an emphatic no. And Mr. Washington thus faces the triple paradox of his career. So again, he's talking about that Washington's strategies, leadership strategies, and conciliatory attitude is contributing to the deprivation of political rights for Negroes, making them a servile caste, and allowing them the most meager chance for developing exceptional men. Again, Du Bois is coming from an affluent lens, so he wants more black men to look like him. That's not going to always be the case. You can be an exceptional person through industrial education as well. So he is striving nobly to make Negro artisans businessmen and property owners, but it is utterly impossible under modern competitive methods for working men and property owners to defend their rights and exist without the right of suffrage, which is voting. He insists on thrift and self-respect, but at the same time counsels a silent submission to civic inferiority, such as is bound to sap the manhood of any race in the long run. And then he advocates common school and industrial training, and depreciates institutions of higher learning, but neither the Negro common schools nor Tuskegee itself could remain open a day were it not for teachers trained in Negro colleges or trained by their graduates. So Washington's pursuit or encouragement towards industrial education, um, through Du Bois, he's suggesting that he doesn't really understand the full problem. He's pushing for this idea of conciliation, and don't worry about political rights right now. Don't worry about um, voting rights. But with Du Bois, he's suggesting that if you are not concerned about voting rights, but work, you want working men and property owners, they can't become that without voting rights. You can't insist on them having a personal self-respect, but submitting to civic inferiority, meaning don't vote. You can't really look down on Negro colleges um, when the people that you are hiring at Tuskegee itself relies on the preparation of people through um, in higher education, advocating common school and industrial training, but you get those people who teach at their colleges coming from higher education institutions. So what I believe Du Bois is suggesting here in terms of his paradox is that Washington doesn't fully understand the problem, the whole problem. He hasn't really thought it fully out, and so there are many more dynamics to the issue that he hasn't really considered. Criticism number 8: voting is necessary. So they do not expect that the free right to vote, to enjoy civil rights, and to be educated will come in a moment. They do not expect to see the bias and prejudices of years disappear at the blast of a trumpet. But they are absolutely certain that the way for people to gain their reasonable rights is not by voluntarily throwing them away and insisting that they do not want them. That the way for people to gain respect is not by continually belittling and ridiculing themselves. That, on the contrary, Negroes must insist continually, in season and out of season, that voting is necessary to modern manhood, that color discrimination is barbarism, and that black boys need education as well as white boys. So I do agree with Du Bois here. I also agree with Washington that economic development should take a higher priority, because even if you have voting rights, if you don't uh, own property, or if you don't have, or if you can't take care of yourself as a grown person, that's going to affect anything you do. So voting rights can come before or after, but I do believe that what Du Bois is suggesting here, that education, that black boys need education as well as white boys. Whether or not voting is necessary, to me, just really depends on the situation at that time. Criticism number 9: oppose industrial slavery. So it is wrong to encourage a man or people in evil doing. It is wrong to aid and abet a national crime simply because it is unpopular not to do so. The growing spirit of kindliness and reconciliation between the North and South after the frightful difference of a generation ago ought to be a source of deep congratulation to all, and especially to those whose mistreatment caused the war. But if that reconciliation is to be marked by the industrial slavery and civic death of those same black men with permanent legislation into a position of inferiority, then those black men, if they are really men, are called upon by every consideration of patriotism and loyalty to oppose such a course by all civilized methods, even though such opposition involves disagreement with Mr. Booker T. Washington. Again, he's thinking about it in terms of the superiority inferiority imbalance. And so what Du Bois wants is free, wants higher education, but he also wants voting rights for all black men. And so he's looking at this idea of industrial slavery as a return to chattel slavery, but they're not the same. Industrial slavery, you work and you get paid. Chattel slavery, you work and you do not get paid. We have no right. We have no right to sit silently while the inevitable seeds are sown for a harvest of disaster to our children, black and white. So then he proffers some solutions uh, that go against Washington's strategy. Solution number 1: judge the South. First, it is the duty of black men to judge the South discriminately. The present generation of Southerners are not responsible for the past, and they should not be blindly hated or blamed for it. Furthermore, to no class is the indiscriminate endorsement of the recent course of the South toward Negroes more nauseating than to the best thought of the South. The South is not solid. It is a land in the ferment of social change wherein forces of all kinds are fighting for supremacy. And to praise the ill the South is today perpetrating is just as wrong as to condemn the good. Discriminating and broad-minded criticism is what the South needs. Needs it for the sake of her own white sons and daughters, and for the insurance of robust health, mental, and moral development. It's hard for the South to care about healthy mental and moral development when the plantation owners uh, have lost their slaves. They don't care about judgment. The fact that their judgment for them is in fact losing their slaves. They're not going to go into some sort of contemplative, reflective, intellectual inquiry about why they did what they did. But that's his solution: judge the South. Solution number two, judge Southern attitudes. Today, even the attitude of the Southern whites toward the blacks is not, as so many assume in all cases, the same. The ignorant Southerner hates the Negro. The working men fear his competition. The money makers wish to use him as a laborer. Some of the educated see a menace in his upward development, while others, usually the sons of the masters, wish to help him to rise. National opinion has enabled this last class to maintain the Negro common schools and to protect the Negro partially in property, life, and limb. If you remember the passing of Grandison, Dick Owens wanting to help Grandison escape, so the sons of the masters wish to help him to rise. Through the pressure of the moneymakers, the Negro is in danger of being reduced to semi-slavery, especially in the country districts. The working men and those of the educated who fear the Negro have united to disfranchise him, and some have urged his deportation, while the passions of the ignorant are easily aroused to lynch and abuse any black man. So again, what he's suggesting about Washington is that Washington did not see this coming. That's why he's saying judge the Southern attitudes. The Southern attitudes wants to bring back some form of slavery because it was economically advantageous to white slave owners. Uh, they they don't want they don't want the Negro fully educated. They want to be able to disfranchise him, which goes to voting, and they want and if they can't get their way, uh, Southern attitudes. If they can't get their way, we need to deport them, um, deport the Negro, and then if we can't deport them, we'll just lynch and abuse any black man. So he's suggesting that we have to judge the Southern attitudes. Conclusion. So for um, for Du Bois, his conclusion is pursuit of equality is key. By every civilized and peaceful method, we must strive for the rights which the world accords to men, clinging unwaveringly to those great words which the sons of the fathers would fain forget. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So essentially, he's throwing back into the white um, people across the color line the very same thing that applies to them applies to the Negro, which is the pursuit of equality. All right, so these are the works. You can find information about the 20th century, W.E.B. Du Bois's selections from the Souls of Black Folk, the Britannical entry for Plessy v. Ferguson, the Separate Car Act, Jim Crow laws, as well as the timeline, Emancipation Proclamation, and then the Britannical entry for causes and effects of the American Civil War. Again, don't forget Realism, Naturalism, Spanish American War, Glossary of Literary Terms, and then Point of View. These are W.E.B. Du Bois's resources. So we have the Britannica entry for Du Bois. He was an American sociologist and social reformer. The Hutchins Center for African and African American Research at Harvard University. And then the Harvard and the Legacy of Slavery report here. And then W.E.B. Du Bois's uh, bibliography, which you can find on the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy website. All right, so this is the end of the presentation. Thank you very much for listening.